inequality and mortality and other health measures is considerably stronger and can be accounted for simply by the concavity at the individual level. And in fact, something else must be going on. And we introduced, as we introduced last time, relative deprivation. So where you are in this sort of hierarchy of individuals in the population might produce adverse effects inside people's bodies and not just outside their bodies. And these mechanisms can reinforce each other, of course, and may operate at different levels of geographic aggregation, larger and smaller respectively. So we might think that the ones that are working outside people's bodies might be operating at sort of larger levels of explanation, and inside people's bodies at smaller geographic levels. People are comparing themselves to nearby people and not just to, let's say, people in the whole country. I have to adjust this device. Excuse me 1 second. Otherwise the recordings won't work. Okay. So now it's true that a reduction in income inequality via income transfers from, let's say, the rich to the poor can improve health as a result of the concave nature of the health wealth curve operating at the individual level. So as we saw the last time, for example, if you imagine people in the United States and you took this amount of income from X4 to X minus 3 from a rich person and transferred it to a poor person, moving them from X1 to X2, and having no effect on average income, you might have actually a big effect on average health, moving it up substantially, because the health gains to the poor person from an equal income transfer are much greater than the health loss to a rich person because of the nonlinear shape of the fundamental relationship between wealth and health at the individual level. But there's another way, a completely different way, that reducing income inequality, other than transfers, other than just taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor, might improve health at the population level. That would, and that might be that such a reduction in income inequality might shift the whole curve up. That is, something about living in a context with less inequality might change the whole set point of the wealth-health relationship for everyone in the distribution. Thus, the green curve might be Sweden, and the orange curve here might be the United States. And for any given income, everyone fares better in Sweden. So the argument here is that now we go to a society, and it's not that I'm going to tax you, and take money from you and give it to him, and that transfer is going to reduce inequality and move people around and raise the average health of the population. No, the claim is now that this transfer of income does something not just to the individuals themselves, but to the whole distribution, moving the whole curve up, shifting where the curve is in this axis. And if that's true, what that means is that the curve now, instead of being in this location, moves up. That means that for every given income, health is better in a society where, in toto, income is more equally distributed. So this might be the curve for Sweden, let's say, and this might be the curve for Ghana, further down. So something about equalizing or reducing inequality is not just about moving the income from person to person, but might shift the whole curve up or down. That is, the argument is that income inequality can work to actually move the curve up or down altogether and not just move individuals along it. Well, the question now becomes, what might be some of the mechanisms by which income inequality might shift the curve up or down? So if that's true, that the curve is moving up or down because we're reducing or increasing inequality, what might be some of the mechanisms that happens? We talked a little bit about the neo-material ideas the last time, and today I want to spend a bit more time on the psychosocial rules. The basic argument is that hierarchy and inequality, especially if long-standing and cumulative, can affect individuals' health. Indeed, the point is that hierarchy has always mattered because it did when we evolved in the first place. And part of the reason for this is that a minimum amount of income is not enough to efface hierarchy and its effects on health. Part of the reason that a minimum amount of income is not enough to efface the effects of hierarchy on health is that people have needs beyond the basic necessities necessities beyond being merely above the poverty line. And it turns out that these needs that we all have should ideally be met if we are to be healthy physically and mentally. And they can be arrayed in the famous Maslow's hierarchy of needs shown here. So the idea is that people have different sorts of needs. We have need for physical needs, for air, water, food, exercise, and so forth. Security needs, safety, shelter, and stability. Social needs, the need for being loved, belonging, and inclusion. So-called ego needs, the need for self-esteem, power, recognition, prestige. And these needs are meant for achievement, recognition, promotions, and bonuses, and so forth. And finally, at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are so-called needs related to self-actualization, the need for development, creativity, and so forth. And these needs are meant for autonomy and achievement. So there's this sort of hierarchy of needs that individual people have from the bottom to the top. And these needs are important for the present case today because they help shed light on why the health socioeconomic status relationship is not, in fact, a step function. Why is it the case that if you just give everyone food and clothing, their health isn't perfect? Well, maybe it has something to do with the fact that even though you've satisfied the needs at the bottom, there are all these other needs that need to be satisfied too if you're to maximize the well-being and health of individuals. And maybe there's something about hierarchy that interferes with the satisfaction of those higher order needs, even if you're living in a society which is satisfying the needs of people at the bottom of the pyramid. So, for example, a famous example is that if you're in a subway in Washington, D.C., in the D.C. Metro, which is a beautiful subway, and you travel the 12 miles from downtown Metro Station to downtown Montgomery County, Maryland, and you're traveling underground 12 miles, the average age of the population, of the local population segment, on the surface above you as you're traveling underground, the life expectancy of that local population rises about a year for every half mile that you travel. So poor black men at one end of the journey in the middle of DC have a life expectancy of 57 years, and rich white men at the other end have a life expectancy of nearly 77 years. So you're just traveling underground in the Washington, D.C. area, in our country, one of the richest countries on earth, and there's this enormous variation in life expectancy. And this difference cannot be explained by our society not meeting people's physical needs at the bottom of the pyramid. It's not the case that the explanation for this is that we're not satisfying the need for air, water, food, exercise, rest, and freedom from diseases, and so forth. Okay? I mean, some of that's happening, no doubt, but that's not the full explanation for this very big difference in life expectancy in this short distance travel in Washington, D.C. So something else must be going on. And that thing that's going on, of course, is that man does not live by bread alone. There are more needs, it turns out, than those that can be acquired by giving enough income to avoid poverty. So just stopping people's poverty and eliminating poverty isn't going to solve the problem. And in particular, people have needs for autonomy, psychological integrity, and integration into society. And these are key, as we shall see, in helping us understand not only the stratification of health in our society, but the relationship between income inequality and illness. And in fact, there's a social gradient in health even when we move beyond meeting the lowest needs of people, even after we correct the problem of the lack of food and water. And it may have something to do with whether these other needs are met. And this may be why, even as people's material needs are met, we still observe a hierarchy in health status. Failure to meet these needs may lead to metabolic and endocrine changes that in turn place people at risk for illness or death. And there are in fact fundamental processes related to autonomy and social integration that play a role here, and these processes are socially stratified so that those at the top have more of these features and those at the bottom, and the health benefits that result, and those at the bottom have fewer of these features and fewer of the health benefits that result. Now, teasing out causation here as before in the class is not easy, however, and we'll come to that in a moment. But let's just have some basic biology first, just a little bit of basic biology. So groups of social animals, such as primates, often maintain hierarchies that involve dominance, which in turn can produce marked inequalities in access to particular kinds of resources, which can then further reinforce the hierarchy. So one study, for example, looked at where in the tree the various primates in the hierarchy were living. And so higher-ranking primates seem to be higher up in the tree. Now, what would that matter? Why would there be something different about different parts of the tree? Well, it turned out the fruit on this tree, which was higher up, got more sunlight and ripened in a different way and had more nutrients. So being a higher-ranking primate, which gave you a privileged position literally on the tree in this situation, that gave you access to a resource which was nutritionally more advantageous if you were a primate, which then further reinforced the dominant status of those individuals. But also in primates, it's the case that sociability can counterbalance the stressfulness of such a hierarchy. Now, there are different kinds of ways that primates can evince hierarchy, and you can contrast that by looking at the left versus on the right. On the right, we have hierarchy with sort of, all of these animals have some hierarchy, but on the right, this hierarchy is manifested through so aggressive displays and dominance, and on the left, the hierarchy is coped with or dealt with through social interactions of diverse sorts. And many of these effects are connected to basic sociobiological ideas. As the evolutionary biologist Richard Alexander has pointed out, the primary hostile force of nature that human beings experience is other humans. We actually don't have many natural predators. The main thing that kills us is others of us. So learning how to cope with the existence of other people and the threats that they pose to us is a key task from an evolutionary perspective. And in fact, because we share all the same basic needs with other members of our species, they can be our most feared competitors and be very threatening, of course. But they can also be a source of friendship, support, and cooperation. And it might therefore be adaptive, evolutionarily speaking, to form groups. Not just to avoid other people because they threaten us, but to seek them out because they can help us in diverse sorts of ways. That is, conflict is a constant possibility, and the potential threat of other members of our species a constant presence in the evolutionary landscape. And this shaped, no doubt, the evolution of behaviors with respect to sociality and our response to hierarchy and the potential threat of others. So we may think about two contrasted ways to organize human populations. There's a kind of dominance hierarchy way we can imagine organizing them, and a kind of friendship equality way, both of which have left their mark on our bodies and our behaviors. And I do not mean to suggest some kind of deep-seated biological basis for any particular political system here. I'm just highlighting the fact that across evolutionary time, we've had to balance or address these sort of conflicting pressures, the benefits of being with others and the cost of being with others. So now I want to highlight the fact that we should not be surprised to find that social organization might become embodied, literally, and hence affect the health of individuals. So for example, as part of the fight or flight response, as you all know, our bodies release a number of things. So when you are in a fight or flight situation, the amount of epinephrine in your body surges. This release of epinephrine and all kinds of other hormones have diverse effects. Your ears will cock forward to let in more sound. Your eyes will widen, your nares will widen to let in more light and senses so you can smell. Blood flow to the splanchnic beds to your intestines decreases. You don't need to digest food when you're thinking of fighting or fleeing. But the blood flow to the skeletal muscle beds increases, so you're getting ready to fight. And one of the things that your body also does in that situation is it starts producing and releasing more fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is a protein precursor to blood clotting, to blood clots, that circulates in your body. Why, in a fight or flight situation, might your body be releasing more fibrinogen? Well, you're preparing to be injured. You're preparing to be bitten or scratched or assaulted in some way. And the ability to clot effectively when you're attacked is very adaptive. So part of the fight or flight response is the production of more fibrinogen. But in the modern era, we're not actually scratched or bitten or assaulted physically and don't actually need to clot when we are feeling the fight or flight response. And that fibrinogen builds up and circulates in your body. And the fibrinogen can then also clot when it needn't clot or shouldn't clot in wrong places. For example, in the arteries that support your heart. So what may be happening is if you're subjected to stress and you feel assaulted, your body reacts adaptively and normally, but that stress is then internalized into your body and manifested by inappropriate thrombosis or clotting inside your coronary arteries, which then can increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. So, and in fact, part of the irony there is that typically the biggest threat to us in the past was not like a saber-toothed tiger, but other members of our species. So seeing other people around us and being threatened by them, or experiencing a hierarchy of some kind, can elicit in our body all kinds of responses which are both adaptive and maladaptive in diverse sorts of ways. Interestingly, higher levels of fibrinogen have also been found in relatively more junior office workers in the British civil service, as you'll either read for today or read soon in the reading. Now, that makes absolutely no sense if you think about it from the point of view of Maslow's hierarchy at the bottom. These are British citizens with stable jobs in offices in London. Why do they need fibrinogen to protect them from physical assaults? They don't. Yet, our bodies are such that if you're lower ranking on the totem pole in the British civil service, you're producing more fibrinogen in your body. Hence, hierarchy and inequality, especially longitudinal and cumulative, can affect individuals' health. And indeed, the point is that hierarchy still matters because it did when we evolved in the first place. Our bodies respond in particular ways and manifest themselves in response to hierarchy, even though it would seem totally preposterous that there would be relevant hierarchy in downtown London, for example. Is that clear? Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, have there been any studies on what fibrinogen college students?
Like before exams or something? I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure people have done that kind of study. I don't know the answer. If you find one and you send it to me, I'd be grateful for it. In some papers I was reading, I'm teaching a graduate class that meets today, and some papers I was reading today, which I may add in future years to this class, it's becoming increasingly clear that social exposures, even fleeting ones, like sleep deprivation, for example, can affect your transcriptome, can affect like which genes of yours are being actively transcribed at any given moment, and can upregulate or downregulate dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands of genes. And interestingly, in a way that I'll come to after this break in another lecture when we talk about epigenetics, there are ways in which social exposures can quasi-permanently regulate which genes your body expresses. So one paper I was just reading today, which I may assign next year, is an interesting paper, looks at what happens to the babies of women who were morbidly obese and then had weight reduction surgery. And they had a baby when they were very big, and they had a baby when they were very small. And the babies they had when they were very small, although genetically are the same as the babies they had when they were very big, those babies that they had, and the baby now is experiencing a different social environment, the uterus of the mother when the mother is no longer big, those babies have epigenetic marks, their genes are being controlled by methylation in a completely different way. So something about the social exposure, whether it's the amount of sleep you get, the poverty you're in, whether you grow up in a war zone, whether you're abused as a child, whether your mother was big or small when you were in utero with her, all of these things are marks we carry with us in ways that are very fascinating. And so it's possible that even the collegiate experience has this effect. I mean, one of the things I looked at years ago, I don't think you guys signed, did I give you guys the paper on operational sex ratio in this class? I don't think so. So in that paper, what we did is we looked at whether it's stressful if you're the supernumerary sex. It's very stressful. So if you're a man and you're heterosexual and you're looking for a female sexual partner, and there aren't many of them, it's not a nice situation to be in. And conversely, if you're a woman and there are many women and very few men, it's also not a nice situation. So being the supernumerary sex, the sex there's too many of you in a heterosexual population, when you're at physical maturity, can be stressful. So we reasoned, in keeping with some animal data, that something similar should happen among humans. For example, raise your hands if you went to an all-boys or all-girls school, high school. Yeah. Okay, that's actually not good for your health. It turns out. And all of you went to schools with different proportions of boys and girls, let's say in your graduating class. We did a study that looked at all the basically all the high schoolers in the state of Wisconsin in 1957. And we saw how the proportion of boys versus girls in their graduating class was associated with their lifespan. And we found that if you were a man that went to a high school where there were many more boys than girls, you lived less long. Years later, it sucked having been in that kind of an environment. One can only imagine imagine the problems I faced going to an all-boys high school at marketing. But anyway, so yes, so these types of social exposures can have big effects. Yeah. That's Cecilia. Anna. What's your name?
Kira?
Kira.
Yeah. Are there forms of stress that don't come from the fight or flight response? Or do all forms of stress?
Most forms of stress, I think we respond in part with the fight or flight. Now, fight or flight is a kind of omnibus set of responses that's been grouped together. And of course, it's very complex. It involves lots of hormonal and other changes. But yes. And the thing is, the idea here is even when you're experiencing sort of mental stress, not physical stress, you might respond similarly. What was your name, just so I can help remember more of your names? Josh. Okay, other questions? Okay, I've totally lost where I was. Let me just see if I can find where I was. More fibrinogen, yeah, more fibrinogen. What was it with more fibrinogen? Yes, thank you, that's right. Okay. And in fact, some of you have already been touching on this. Stressors can be of various kinds. Celia, is that right? Kira, thank you, Kira. And Wububa, where is she today?
She couldn't make it.
Please tell her. I called her out today and she wasn't here. Okay. It's just my luck. In fact, just as Celia and others were alluding to, there are various kinds of, Kira. Come to Officers, introduce yourself to me. Stressors of various kinds can elicit various kinds of bodily processes. So a physical stressor is an external challenge to homeostasis, which is sort of the equilibrium regulation of your body. And a psychosocial stressor is the anticipation, justified or not, that a challenge to homeostasis looms. Psychosocial stressors typically engender feelings of lack of control or lack of predictability and a sense of lacking outlets for the frustration caused by the stressor. And both types of stressors activate an array of endocrine and neural adaptations. So we adapt to stress in part because our nervous systems are set up that way. So did I already ask you once earlier in class about the socks under feet example? Did I ask you that? Yeah. So you remember that example. So when you put your socks on this morning, you felt them going on. But right now, most of you, until I asked the question, were unaware of your socks. So because you've adapted to the experience of having socks on. And similarly, I almost certainly talked about the spider in your hand example, how it's very stressful if you're afraid of a spider, and I put a big hairy spider on your hand, it freaks you out, but eventually you adapt to that stress of having the stressful exposure. But chronic and repetitive activation of the stress response by chronic psychosocial stressors, such as constant close proximity to an anxiety-producing member of our own species, can increase the risk of numerous diseases or exacerbate such pre-existing conditions as hypertension, atherosclerosis, insulin-dependent diabetes, immune suppression, reproductive impairments, and affective disorders. The point here is that low rank is stressful, okay? If you're lowly ranked, regardless of whether you have a roof over your head and food and water, it's stressful to you and it activates this sort of stress response, which has a variety of hormonal and endocrine features. And these features, and I'll come to Rob in just a moment, these features are, still highlighted here. Here are the neuroendocrine effects of stress. So when you're stressed, what happens to your body? Your brain can be affected. There can be dendritic atrophy, which is not a good thing, especially you guys. Impaired neurogenesis and synaptic plasticity. Enhanced benzodiazepine tone, which is also not a good thing. There's immune suppression. Your adrenal gland is responding in all kinds of ways. Your testes are atrophying, which is also a bad thing. Probably not as bad as brain atrophy, but also bad. Your ovary is also suffering. And your heart can have basal hypertension, sluggish response to recovery from stress, pathogenic cholesterol profile, and so forth. So being exposed to stress has all kinds of bad effects in many organ systems in your body. Yeah.
But how is this compatible with the idea as you're coming out last class that new material, do you looking at health food quality, is it more about theory or?
No, they're both happening. So both are important. Both, there's not either or. The neo-material and the psychosocial are both important. So today we're spending a bit more time on the psychosocial, how it works, and I'll come to a bunch of examples in just a bit. But we're also building to the argument over the scale at which they matter. So I'm going to be arguing soon that psychosocial factors matter a lot with respect to your people near you. Whereas the neo-material thing might matter at a greater level of geographic aggregation, like the whole state, what laws are passed regarding clean air in the state, for example. So the basic argument is that inequality at the state level results in people not caring about making public investments. And so air pollution rises in places where there's high inequality. And you suffer as a result. Everybody suffers. And the psychosocial argument goes, you're not aware of the people that are living in Greenwich, Connecticut, and they have multi-million-dollar mansions, and you have no idea about it, but you are aware about what your peers are doing, how many dates they have on Saturday night, what their GPAs are, and so forth in your entryway. And so, but you all breathe the same air. So that psychosocial experience is working on a smaller scale. Did I answer your question? Yeah. So they're not mutually exclusive. Other questions? What's your name?
Hannah?
Hannah.
In the article on primates, though, it basically said that it's not always low rank that causes stress, because it's like a dynamic hierarchy, the dominant
Yes.
that can be more stressful.
Yes, that's right. So thank you for
So
pointing
as
that out.
far as like humans go, that would be really like different across the board.
So some people believe, and I think it's complex, and I've simplified it today or blown by or suppressed some of the details. If you have to constantly assert your dominance and enter many battles, real or imagined, that can be very stressful too. And there's an endless debate, there's an ongoing debate about which jobs are the most stressful in our society. So, maybe certain jobs that seem to have a lot of power and authority actually are more stressful than we think about, than you might imagine. So yes, it's complex. It's just like, it's complex in the same way that we both need each other and fear each other, right? We're both sociable and violent to each other. So across evolutionary time, there's been a kind of balancing in these forces and ways of coping with them. So, but the point here is that low rank can be stressful. And moreover, as Angus Deaton, a Princeton economist, puts it, and I'm quoting Angus here, the degree to which low rank is harmful to an individual is likely to depend on the number of people of higher rank, because each such person is in a position to deliver the threats, insults, and forced obeisance or ultimate violence that generates stress. Individuals who are insulted by those immediately above them insult those immediately below them, generating a cascade of threats and violence through which low-ranked individuals feel the burden, not just of their immediate superiors, but the whole hierarchy above them. And so typically, lower ranks and statuses convey more stress, and the lower you are, the more stressful it is. Now, an important thing to recognize is that rank or status is a relative, not an absolute thing. It's relative, right? Rank and status. Therefore, a link between status and health suggests the importance of relative standing for health. And it is very hard to eliminate relative standing, partly because it seems to be biologically hardwired, and partly because the natural lottery is inherent. So we seem hardwired to care about hierarchy. We all know this. You care about where you stand compared to others. It's hard to eliminate those feelings of envy or comparison, first. And second, by the same kind of natural, not the same, but by a similar sort of natural process, there is unavoidable hierarchy because of the natural lottery. People vary in their tastes and talents and abilities and so forth. So we have kind of a double whammy of living in a world with some amount of hierarchy that's unavoidable and also caring about it, which we can't seem to avoid. Now, I'm not saying it's all biological because it's not, but for this part of the talk today, we're emphasizing the biological parts. In fact, humans have very clear ideas about their relative standing and what it means to be relatively deprived of desirable attributes or goods. And here is a canonical formulation by W.G. Runciman from 1966 of a theory of relative deprivation. And he said, we can roughly say that a person is relatively deprived of X when 1, he does not have X, 2, he sees some other persons as having X, and 3, he wants X, and 4, he sees it as feasible that he should have X. So for example, I could not be relatively deprived of the experience of giving birth. I might want that experience, but it's not feasible for me to have that experience, okay? So all 4 of these conditions have to be satisfied. But note how even this formulation immediately calls forth questions about social justice. Yes, Danny?
But then wouldn't we expect people to, that they're living kind of socioeconomic segregated societies with ghettos or with rich neighborhoods that kind of fenced in to be healthier? Is that?
They might be healthier, yes.
Because those conditions just.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly
That's
right.
not what we observe.
No, that's not, it depends. So the real experiment you have to do is you have to take 100 people of different income inequalities and ask the question, if I segregated them into different communities, would their health be better than if I didn't segregate them into different communities?
But then we expected if I lived in Brazil,
And I'm sorry, with one further stipulation, that if you're in the poor community, you must be totally unaware of the existence of the rich community, which is a hard condition to meet in the current modern era. Because we're all aware of, what people above and below us are like. Yeah, I'm sorry, what?
But so if I live in a very polarized society,
Yes.
you would expect that to have a positive effect on my health.
No, Dan, it might or might not. The counterfactual is a well-mixed such population. So you're going to take 100 people with different, you're going to take 10 very poor people and 10 not so poor, all the way up to 10 very rich people, and you can array them in two different ways in space. You can randomly mix them, or you can put them into little ghettos, rich, poor, etc., ghettos, with a further stipulation that in each ghetto, nobody would know what anyone else was doing. It's possible that in the latter case, people would fare better because they're unaware of what's the relative standing anymore. It's like the idea of the airplane with first class that we discussed the last time. Maybe if you let the people enter through the rear of the plane and they're not even aware of first class anymore, they're better off. They might be better off in that regard. But there can be countervailing factors which make them worse off. For example, a decline in investment in the commons, for example. So rich people are often in their own ghetto right now. They feel, what do we care about whether there is a working judiciary or clean air or whatever. So it's not so simple, but it is the case that it might be the case that if you stratify people by ability, they might be better off. So some of you probably went to high schools, many of you probably went to high schools where they were straight up of ability in the high schools. And they were labeled different things, right? But they were tracks that where the brighter kids were able to do better. Now, the question is, that's debated in the education literature, is that better for everyone? So imagine your kid that's really struggling with math, and you suddenly go into a class with a kid that's just getting it like that. Maybe that sucks to be in that classroom. Maybe both of you are better off if the kid that's really getting it, he gets moved to class with other classmates that he or she can interact with, and the kid that's not getting it, he gets put with kids that do. But other people say that's the wrong thing to do, because actually the kids are better able to speak to each other. So the kid with better math ability can talk in the language the other kid can understand and explain the math problems to him. So there's a debate about this even in this situation. And there have been all kinds of experiments that have been done in this thing. I'm not leaving the class today thinking I'm making a position on tracking. I know very little about tracking it, but I'm happy to be persuaded by the literature in either regard. So let's look at some results from humans, however, since this question has come up. So this is the ladder from the Marmot of reading. And so here's a social status ladder. So people were asked to answer the question in the following way. Think of this ladder as representing where people stand in our society. At the top of the ladder are the people who are the best off, those with the most money, most education, and best jobs. And at the bottom are the people who are the worst off, those who have the least money, least education, and worst jobs or no jobs. Place an X on the rung that best represents where you stand on the ladder. And so people are just asked to place an X on where they think they perceive themselves to be in this kind of a ladder. And here's some results regarding self-perceived status, where you are on the ladder, and prevalence of different sorts of health problems in male British civil servants. So these are all men, they're all British citizens, they all have access to the National Health Service, they all have jobs, they're all working in London, and they're just putting an X on where they are on the ladder, and here's what their health looks like. So people whose subjective health rank is bad, 1 or 2, which way? I can't remember the ladder. 1 or 2 is the best. So people whose health status is good, 1 or 2, they have this prevalence, whatever it is, 3.6% of angina compared to 9.5%, that's heart pain, amongst people at the bottom of the ladder. Diabetes prevalence is 0.34% amongst those at the top, 4% amongst those at the bottom. Respiratory diseases, depression goes fourfold. 10% of those people at the top are depressed compared to 42% of those at the bottom. varies dramatically. So these type of results, which Marmot collected over the last 30 years, have been very influential in changing thinking about this topic in a number of ways. First of all, they show two things. First, that your subjective social standing is important. Where you think you are on the ladder is correlated with all kinds of other measures of your health. And second, and in some ways more subtle and more interesting, there is a continuous gradient in numerous health measures by this kind of social standing. There's not a clean cutoff. It's not like if you're above some status, then your health is terrific, and if you're below that, your health is not. At every step of the way, status seems to matter. Your relative standing is important. Yeah, Dan.
But we can also bring reverse causation.
Yeah, so far I'm just showing a relationship. That's right. But these are all British civil servants with jobs, so if you're going to claim reverse causation, it's not because the people at the bottom are being, victimized by violence or don't have food or water. Something else is going on, even in that situation.
If I'm depressed, it's hard for me to turn up the acid. If I suffer from depression.
Yeah, I'm not making a statement yet about the direction of the causation. I'm just saying there's an association, but I'm inviting you to reflect on the fact that this relationship has been observed in a population that if whatever the relationship, either direction it's going, it's not because it's compromising your access to basic resources, right? Something else is going on that has to do with the hierarchy of individuals within this population. And as I just said in my notes here, I was about to say, these results don't clarify the causal order, of course. They are powerful indicators that a relationship, but they are powerful indicators that the relationship is not a step function. And data such as this, with which we are now quite familiar, show that being poor is associated with greater mortality. And no doubt being very poor is very bad for your health. But this figure also shows a gradient. So here shows annual income, and here's the age-adjusted mortality rate per 10,000 person years. And this shows that mortality by income among white U.S. men, and it shows that there's a kind of, you keep stepping. The more money you have, the lower your mortality is, roughly continuously across the income gradient. It's not like you have elevated risk of death until you get $20,000 and you can buy food and water, and then bang, it's no longer a problem, you're okay. Across the entire continuum, something seems to be going on. And this may or may not seem obvious, but why should there be a continuous gradient in health and SES? I mean, why isn't it a step function? Why should the difference, for example, between $50,000 and $60,000 or between $200,000 and $300,000 matter? What difference could it possibly make if you make $1 million compared to $500,000 in our society? It's not like it's going to buy you more food, water, shelter, and so forth. Why is it, in fact, not a step function, which is one of the possible curves we saw the last time? So here's yet another example of a gradient. This is in a large American sample. This study examined functional health status in over 330,000 Americans who were 55 years of age or older across the full socioeconomic spectrum. And there was a social class gradient here as well, showing that respondents with higher incomes have lower levels of functional limitation, regardless of how far they are removed from poverty. So here's a poverty line, sort of another measure of income on the x-axis. Here are functional characteristics in men at the top and women at the bottom. These lines are for different age groups, and they show that the richer you get, the less likely you are to be disabled. And the slope of this line is steeper in younger people compared to older people. By the time you're older than 85, your income doesn't matter anymore. It's your age that's frankly the determinant of your functional limitations. And that the gradients are steeper in women than they are in men. Again, a continuous measure. This is the key intellectual idea here, is that it's out across the whole spectrum, even at levels of income where it would seem to strain credulity that there's something practical that you're obtaining with that money. Now, there are a number of possible explanations for this gradient, this gradient type of relationship. Relative differences in status might translate into absolute differences in people's life chances, by affecting two key items in humans' needs. So now the intellectual question becomes, well, how can it be that relative standing, even at the top end of the spectrum, can affect your health? What's it doing in order to have that effect? And there are two ways that it can do this, how relative differences in status can translate into absolute differences in life chances. And these are by at least two ways. by affecting your autonomy, and by affecting your social integration, higher up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And as Nobel laureate economist Amartya Sen has pointed out, it may not be what one has that is important, it may be what one can do with what one has that's important. Hence, a person's relative position on the scale of income may translate into an absolute position in what he calls capabilities. So it's not how much money you have that's important, it's what you can do with that money, what kind of capabilities it gives you, and these may be relative rather than absolute goods in some particular way. So even though poor people in the United States have many times the wealth of those in other countries, they still live shorter lives because they cannot do as much, because they suffer from a lack of autonomy and social integration, because they are less able to meet higher needs on Maslow's list. So even the poor American is richer than a rich person, let's say in some Latin American or African country. The poor American can do less with his or her money, given where he is in the hierarchy, than the absolutely worse off person in one of those other countries, who's nevertheless higher up in the hierarchy of those particular countries. In other words, it may not be one's position in the social hierarchy per se that is the problem. It may be what this position means for what a person can do in a given environment that is material. It is the extent to which position affects opportunities for autonomy and social participation. And the link can perhaps be broken by compensating for hierarchy, by equalizing, even if we cannot eliminate the consequences of the hierarchy, and by counterbalancing the natural and the social lottery. For example, lower status can lead to low participation in social interactions and less reciprocity, and these are associated with worse health. So if you're lower on the totem pole, you don't interact with other people as much. And when you do interact with them, there's less reciprocity. And those things are fundamentally adversely affect your health. And social participation is not merely something that high-status individuals acquire or make for themselves. Societies can, as a whole, also foster or increase social participation. And this in turn leads to the idea of social capital, which we'll discuss, a very important idea we'll discuss later in class. So the idea is, even though we might grant that there's inequality in our society, we may want to create a kind of society that increases social participation, even for individuals at the bottom. And in so doing, lift everyone up, including the individuals at the bottom. There may be ways societies are organized that leads high-status individuals to be better able to tap what social capital is available and to reap higher rates of return on that capital. And conversely, ways of organizing societies that adversely affect those at the bottom, and therefore, by analogy, ways that we can remake our society to improve the lot of everyone. Well, here's some illustrations of this point. Let me ask you let's consider this dilemma. You can choose between two choices. I'm going to ask you all to make this choice now in just a moment. Your current annual income is $50,000, but everyone else earns $25,000. Or your current annual income is $100,000, and everyone else earns $250,000. And my question is, assuming equal, purchasing power, which one would you choose, A or B? So I want every one of you to consider this and then answer. You can be either A or B. Which would you pick? Raise your hands if you prefer A. Okay, raise your hands if you prefer B. Okay, so someone who picked A, why did you pick A? Raise your hand, Raise your hand, speak up. Yes, I forgot your name. Michaela.
You seem relatively better off compared to everybody else.
So you're saying you give up $50,000 because you want to be top dog. You want to earn more money than everyone else.
Sounds bad, but I guess.
Okay, that's what you want. Okay, raise your hands if you pick B. Or someone else wants to defend A. Yeah.
Well, the whole, a lot of the point of having excess money is to show your power, so it doesn't really matter if you're giving money away and buying a car, or you're giving money away and just...
It's purchasing power parity here, so you can actually buy more stuff in roll B than in roll A if you have $100,000. So, but the comparison is better, of course, in roll A. You're right. Yes, that's true, what you said, but you can buy less of it, even if you're, with the $50,000 versus roll A. Who picked roll B? Yeah, what's your name? I'm sorry, what's your name? Could you spell it for me, please? I'll decide. Okay. Why'd you pick B?
It's more money.
It's more money. Greedy son of a bitch. He like says like, you know, like, I want more money, so I'm picking that, so see, I can get either one of you with either, you know, cartoons. So you said you want more money. You're happy to be at the bottom of the totem pole. You're happy to be at the bottom. You just want to live in a world in which you can buy more stuff or acquire more stuff. And in fact, these were the results from the paper in the yellow shows the results in the study that was done by Solnick and Hemingway. 56% of the respondents picked world A, 44% picked world B. Last year when I taught this class, which was about the same as this year's class, most of you preferred to be top dog in a world with everyone else was below you than to have more, which is seemingly completely irrational, right? Like the basic idea of economics is that more is better, you should want more. So in fact, that's what you guys have picked, something similar to previous years that I've taught in this class. So you would rather be relatively better off, even if you're absolutely worse off by a lot. Okay, how about this? Your physical attractiveness is a 6, and everyone else is a 4 on a 10-point scale. Or your physical attractiveness is an 8, and everyone else is a 10. Those are your choices, think about it. You can be a 6, everyone else is a 4, or you can be an 8, and everyone else is a 10. Okay, raise your hands if you want world A. Raise your hands if you want world B. Okay, Danny's at least consistent. How about you?
Wow. I guess like with physical attractiveness and like what matters because it's like relative attractiveness than like just objective.
Okay, so you say, unlike the money case, the physical attractiveness case, it's better to be a 6 in a world of 4s than an 8 in a world of 10s. And your argument is what? That you can...
Like relative attractiveness matters more than physical attractiveness than like access.
So you flipped your thinking on the money versus attractiveness thing. Okay, other ideas? Who else picked A? Yeah, Carrie?
Here.
Kira?
In world A, you would be above average in physical things, in world B, you would be below average.
Correct. But you'd be prettier in world B than in world A, absolutely speaking.
Still be below average.
Yeah, but you'd be absolutely better. Yeah. They wouldn't know that you were prettier. That's right, Michaela. Yes. Layla?
They might know that you're prettier, but also I think physical attractiveness has like direct health benefits.
Yes. But we're not talking about health. We're just talking about the ability to get a date, okay? So, for a second, we're going to move away from health. Yeah. Yes, Amelia.
But in particular, physical attractiveness is inherently subjective, whereas when we had that assumption that you had equal purchasing power,
Yes.
we're assuming that there's something objective about the amount of money that you get.
But we could find an objective measure here that would fit this bill pretty well. So physical attractiveness, fitness, for example, you know, the speed with which you run a mile, facial symmetry, something else we could find. Yes, Dan.
I think that you should look at the other number, the 4 and the 10, because the physical attractiveness matters mostly for romantic interaction, and then would you rather everyone around you be a 10?
I was hoping someone would make that. In world A, you may get more sex, but it's with people who are forced. Whereas in world B, you actually get to have sex with 10s. Thank you, Danny. So you also have to look at the counterparty in this type of a situation when you're judging what kind of world you want to be in. That's right. But you're now beginning to realize that something, yeah, you guys enlighten us what is going on over there. Yeah? What were we saying? Attractive. Yeah, so that's another dilemma, which we'll leave for another day. So actually, we'll come back to that, believe it or not. We'll talk about networks and health. Okay, so this is part of what's going on here, is you're kind of realizing that with certain goods, it might depend on your relative standing, right? Money, some of you switched opinions on this topic. Here's another point. Here's what people picked in the study, 75%. So most of you, again this year, picked that you'd rather be a 6 in a world of 4s and then an 8 in a world of 10s. How about this? You could be the top student at the nearest community college where you grow up, or you can be an average student in Yale. So, all of you face this dilemma. gone to an institution that wasn't as demanding and been the top dog there, but most all of you here didn't choose to do that. But what would, so I mean, maybe this is a moot, but in all seriousness, what of these dilemmas, which would you pick? Would you rather be the top student at the nearest community college where you grew up, or an average student here? Raise your hand if you'd like to be A. Raise your hand if you want to be B. Yeah, yeah. Okay, now why? Why is that? Yes, Rachel.
You get specific advantages from being a student at Yale that really have nothing to do with like how attractive you are, if you're 4 or 6 and make
So there's something about that, this thing, okay? Yes, other ideas. What's your name? Stephanie? Yes, in comparison to the rest of the population, you're still above average. But that's also here. In comparison to the rest of the population, the 6s are still above average. But yeah, okay. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I want to say, like, being a student at Yale, so in comparison to other people who go to Yale, which are all average, that's
That's
the
the relevant comparison. Very good. That's exactly right. Other ideas. Yes. What's your name? You. Yes. Nice to meet you, Chelsea.
being an average student at Yale, or anywhere, will like give you more opportunity to learn, do that.
Yes, so there's something intrinsic about the experience in the situation that you think is valuable, being in this type of a world. Okay, good. Other ideas? Yes, Mary.
Also, when we practice something around people that are friends,
I'm sorry, speak up just a bit.
think about that being surrounded by people that are friends, people are more attractable. Being at Yale, even if you are average or even below average, you're surrounded by people who are willing to enrich your experience more than who are in the cost humanities.
Yeah, so it's again like having sex with tent and become the yes. This is intellectual intercourse we're talking about. Okay? All right, so here's another example. Ready? So we didn't know these percentages because we didn't. All right. So here we are. Which one of these worlds is preferable? You can have 4 weeks of annual vacation and everyone else has 5 weeks. Or you can have 3 weeks of annual vacation and everyone else has 2 weeks. All right. Raise your hands if you'd rather be in world A. Raise your hands if you'd rather be in world B. Very few B's. Okay, you in the back. Tell me why would you rather be B here? Well, you just want less vacation, so you're picking world B. Is that what you're saying?
I feel like if I had 4 weeks of annual vacation, it'll just fly by. I wouldn't really register that it's 4 weeks.
So the scarcity is going to increase the satisfaction. Like you're the kind of person that orders a small ice cream instead of a big one, because that small one is going to really get you focused on how enjoyable the experience is. Okay, other ideas. Who else picked world B? Yeah?
I think that if you go with option A, you'd be complaining your whole life about everybody else having this vacation and you only got 4.
So,
Versus if you're in world B, you have more vacation time than anybody else, and like, that'd be awesome.
that'd be awesome. So you're really still in comparison mode. You're willing to take less vacation just so long as you do better than the next guy who has less vacation than you.
You value it more because,
And you feel better about it.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. Now who picked A? Who picked world A? Why did you pick A?
I feel like this is Yale's embrace in that you're sitting around by yourself, and it's not your friends on vacation at the same time as you. We sit and people have more vacation, there's other ones like that.
Okay, so you have a very, very kind of mathematical, mechanistic explanation. You're saying, if I have less vacation than others, and people have more vacation than me, by stochastically, I'm likely to find someone who's on vacation when I'm on vacation. You're right, technically, about that point. Okay, that's not where I'm headed. Yes, I forgot your name. Yeah, Jen.
I think it's like the rational choice is just to choose the more absolute, like 4 weeks is greater than 3. And I think like if you're very concerned about comparison, like if you're going to, you know that comparing yourself to others will affect you, then sure, go for me. But I think this is my question about sort of the entire lecture is, does this mean people are fundamentally like dissatisfied with standing, even unconsciously? Because like the fact that there's an effect of standing on health means that we're all unhappy.
Yes, this is exactly what I wanted to struggle with. That's why these examples are here. It's exactly right. So here's an example in which actually most people pick A over B, 92%, except for a few, very similar to what it is here. Because vacation is an absolute good, not a relative good. More vacation is better. It doesn't matter what other people have compared to you. Okay? So it's always good to have more whereas the appearance and the money and some of the other examples, relative standing matters. So, now the truth is both matter. Both absolute standing and relative standing. It's not a dichotomy, guys, okay? They're not simple choices in life or in science. Both of these things are important. And in this setting that we're discussing in this class, which of them are important depends on the good, right? So for some things, absolute standing might be better. For other things, relative standing might be better. And relative standing typically is much more important when you're in competition with your peers for access to resources, like the beauty example that we considered, okay? Where your relative standing translates, as Amartya Sen said, into capabilities. If you're a 6 in a world of 4s, you get lots of sex. If you're an 8 in a world of 10s, you get no sex, even though occasionally when you do, it's with a 10. All right? So that's why you're, in that situation, you might prefer higher relative and lower absolute standing, whereas in the vacation setting, how much vacation other people get, except for the few crazy ones of you who want to lord over your vacation to others, makes no difference in the amount of enjoyment you can get. Okay. So vacation is not a competitive good. While vacation days like money and appearance are desirable, having more vacation than others doesn't confer any competitive advantages, generally speaking. So let's go back to the ladder. So here, let's say I show you this ladder and I say, who would you rather be? Would you rather be A or B? Everyone rationally would pick A, being at the top of the ladder. Or I might say, who would you rather be here? A or D? Who would you rather be, A or D? A. Rather be otherwise equal individuals, you'd rather be at the top of the left-hand ladder than at the bottom of the right-hand ladder, even though absolutely you're the same. There's no difference. Only your relative standing matters in these two examples. Or, who would you rather be now? A or E? A. But now I can do an experiment in which I vary where E is and test your trade-off between absolute standing and relative standing. At some point, you're going to prefer to be E, even though E is further down, than you prefer to be A, even though A is at the top. So you would trade off absolute versus relative standing. And those examples are entirely different than this example. So this, for example, now I could ask you, who would you rather be, D or E? Would you rather be D or E? Or is that E or F? I'm sorry. F. D or F? F, right? You have the sense that the ladder is compressed above you. The distribution above you, the inequality is lower on the right than it is in the middle. And so, for example, you could imagine that these might be the countries. This is Ghana, this is the United States, and this is Sweden, as we opened with at the beginning, right? And you could be in different locations within each one. So let's look at some additional evidence for this. One hypothesis, flowing from the observations we made earlier about the biology of hierarchy and stress in primates, is that relative deprivation will matter to an individual's health. And the idea, again, is that it's not so much your absolute deprivation, if any, that matters, but your relative deprivation. And so here's how we can imagine how this argument would go. Low income or status relative to a reference group affects your health. If you're low on the ladder, it's bad for you. This relative deprivation can be seen as the difference between your own income, Y sub I, and the average reference group income, given that income is greater than yours. Who's your reference group of people that are richer? How much richer are they? And relative deprivation is intrinsically an upward-looking, individual-level measure that depends on the incomes of others. So unlike income inequality, which is a measure, a property of groups, right? You cannot speak of your income being unequal. Relative deprivation is a property of individuals. Each of you is relatively deprived compared to your reference group. So I can measure the RD for each of you as individuals. So the richer your reference group, the higher the relative deprivation. If I compare myself to richer people, I'm relatively more deprived. And the relative deprivation describes an individual's standing, and it's different for each member of the group. And inequality, on the other hand, is the same for the entire group. It describes the distribution of income. So one of these, inequality, is a group-level property, and the other, relative deprivation, is an individual-level property by comparison to a group. And here's the math for one measure of relative deprivation. I'm not going to ask you to reproduce this equation, but you need to understand the basic idea. This is the Christakis index of relative deprivation. And so what you do is for each person I, with income Y sub I, who is part of the reference group of n people, what you do is you take the income of every individual Y sub j who is more than Y sub I, and you compute the difference. You look at this income and the income of everyone that's richer than me. You sum that across all the J people, but then you divide it not by the number of people that is richer than me, but by the entire size of the classroom, the entire size of the population. And dividing by n ensures that the relative deprivation is invariant to the size of the reference group. Otherwise, if n doubles, so would the relative deprivation. So Warren Buffett, by this argument, is not deprived by billions compared to Bill Gates, but rather by the difference in their wealth divided by the size of the population. So, for example, if Gates has $3 billion more than Buffett, and there's 300 million people in the country, Warren is relatively deprived compared to Bill by $10. Okay? That's his relative deprivation. I am relatively deprived compared to Bill Gates by much more than that. Okay? You just look at everyone above me. And here are some examples, given the relative deprivation denominated in dollars, for the people with different incomes and with reference groups chosen by location and age. So for example, what we're going to do here is we're going to look at relative deprivation, and the reference group is going to be a kind of a census area and age. So if you live in Hidalgo, Texas, and you are 21 to 25 years old, and you earn $25,000, you're relatively deprived by $4,725. If you earn $100,000 in Hidalgo, Texas, and you're a 20 to 25-year-old, you're doing pretty damn well. You are not relatively deprived at all. 379, a tiny amount. You understand this basic idea so far? Now, of course, if you're older, earning $100,000 makes you more relatively deprived because older people are earning more money. But even in this category, if you're earning $25,000, the people above you in this age group in Hidalgo, you're relatively deprived by $25,000. Now imagine, on the other hand, that you're in New York City, and you go and you take a summer job in New York. If you're earning $25,000 a year in New York, you're really relatively deprived. You're deprived by $17,375. And the point here is that you'd have to earn $100,000 in New York at your age group to be relatively deprived the same amount, about $5,000, as someone earning $25,000 in Hidalgo. You can do about as much with 25 grand in Hidalgo as it takes 100 grand to do in New York. You understand? So 100 grand doesn't get you as high up on the hierarchy in New York City as 25 grand gets you in Hidalgo. So the argument is that it's one's relative deprivation, one's standing in the hierarchy, is roughly the same if you were 25 grand in Hidalgo or 100 grand in New York if you're about 25. This is now in terms of your capabilities in the kind of SEN model. And here's how relative deprivation, again measured at the individual level, is associated with various other health outcomes. So this is relative deprivation and health outcomes. This is a nice paper taken from the NPR working paper series. Here are the predicted percentages. So the question is, are you depressed? At baseline, 14.5% of people are depressed. If you reduce your relative deprivation by 25% points, you are much less likely to be depressed. If I increase your relative deprivation, you're more likely. Anxious, poor health, fair health, the same thing. So modifying your relative deprivation, distinct from modifying your income, can be associated with these health outcomes. And other work done by these investigators suggests that even after controlling for individual income and a number of other covariates, your relative deprivation appears to have a large and statistically significant impact on your probability of dying. Overall, the relative deprivation effect is quite meaningful. The effect of a 1 standard deviation increase in relative deprivation appears to increase mortality by 39%. And similarly, those who are relatively deprived are also more likely to have high blood pressure, smoke, be overweight, not wear their seatbelts, and so forth. So is that clear? The relative deprivation argument. It's an intrinsically individual thing. It's a kind of arithmetic way of placing them in a hierarchy and quantifying, unlike the axis on the ladder, which is this sort of scale of 1 to 10, here I can measure how far apart are the ladder, and I can say you're relatively deprived $5,000, you're relatively deprived $10, you're relatively deprived $100,000, and having done that, I can then see how that relative deprivation, in addition to your age, sex, income, and everything else, is associated with different sorts of health outcomes. Where you are in the ladder, your relative standing, net of your absolute standing, going back. So here, your relative standing is higher than here, and but this person who will have low relative standing compared to this person, and low relative standing compared to this person. this person has high relative standing, but lower absolute standing than this person. So you can assess how the relative standing, E, might suffer from his or her relative standing, despite the fact that E has a higher absolute standing than A. So you can trade off the two and quantify the effect of absolute and relative standing independent of one another. Is that clear? Yeah.
So in the latter, D has a higher relative definition, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But don't they
Then D has higher than who? I'm sorry.
than A?
Yes.
But don't they also have a worse absolute deprivation because, let's say, like goods in America are more expensive than
Yeah, okay, but you can ignore this, take away the countries, just assume that there are some parts of the United States and there's purchasing power parity, for example.
Okay.
Okay. All right, well, I'd like to close by putting a face on some of these differences using some remarkable photographs taken by Mark Leta in his book called Created Equal. He engaged in a multi-year photography project where he photographed people around the country and paired the photos in interesting ways. Some of them are not suitable for public broadcasting, but others are. And here on the left is a homeless man, Phil Dombrowski from LA, and his sign is saying, "Anything could help," is the sign that he's holding. And on the right is real estate developer Gerald Springer from Houston, Texas. Just the contrast of what you can find in our society. On the left is the company president, William Scott from Boston, Massachusetts. And on the right is janitor Walter Johnson from Neptune City, New Jersey. Is this the working of the natural lottery, the social lottery, some kind of unjust social process, some kind of just social process, or all or none of the foregoing? On the left are Amish teenagers Jamie Zook and Sam Stoltzfus from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and on the right are so-called punk teenagers Otto Bixler and Brianna Holland from Hollywood, California. And it's, from my perspective, it's moving, troubling, and relevant to contemplate the workings of the natural and social lotteries that assign us both absolute and relative rankings in our society, and that have so much to do with the kind of health that we experience as individuals, that we experience as a population. Okay, that's it for today. Any questions before I stop? Yes, what was your name?
Lauren.
Lauren.
Yes. What's the name of the photographer?
Laita, L-A-I-T-A. Yes, L-A-I-T-A. And the name of the book is Created Equal. Other questions? Yes, Rachel.
When you were doing the index of relative deprivation, it was the sum of relative deprivation over the total?
It was the sum of the difference. First, you pick an individual, then you pick their reference group, which is everyone earning more money than them. For all y sub j greater than y sub I, you compute the difference. So it can always be positive because the reference group is upward looking, so you don't need to put absolute values around it. You sum it across all j, and then you divide it, and here's the only tricky part of this. You divide it by the size of the entire population, not just the reference group size. So if there are 10 people in this class that make more money than you, we compute the difference in income between you and those 10, and then divide it by 100, not by 10.
So with the example of Bill Gates, though, how come the answer gave is just Bill Gates and not everyone?
Well, he's the richest and the second richest person on the planet in the United States. So pick Warren and Bill, and you would think, is Warren $3 billion worse off than Bill? No, Warren is not doing so bad. And you can quantify that by dividing it. In this metric, he's relatively deprived by $10. Warren can do about as much. Yes, Hannah. I'm sorry, you have to speak up a bit. I can't hear you. Okay, so that's a good question, Hannah. There's a completely different metric, and I forgot the name of it. If one of you finds it, you can let me know. Which is a downward-looking measure. How many people can you stomp on? And the more people you can stomp on, like that, you also might. And they're not linear. That is to say, they're not additive. So you could be higher up in terms of how your stomping power could be higher than your relative deprivation is. And so both of them might matter. How many people you can stomp on are below you, and how many people are above you. So you can measure relative standing either as a downward-looking or upward-looking measure. Today, I just introduced one measure, which is the upward-looking measure. One more question, yeah?
How much does mobility on this ladder matter? Because if we assume that, like, in the second ladder and we're in the bottom, but you have the mobility, like, that you can get up, then, like,
Yes.
then you're better off, because in the other society, you cannot.
Yes, that's a very good question. So you might choose to be, you might even choose to be E rather than A because you look up and you say, oh my goodness, one day I could be C. So I don't want to be A. And so it'll depend, the dynamics of the system will depend what prospects for upward mobility there are. And that's something I completely did not discuss today. Okay, see you next time.